Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London, and today I'm looking at a book which has come to us from Cambridge University Press. This is an important book. It's part of the series that CUP published on comparative constitutional law and policy. Again, I think it's an important area for us at the present time because of difficulties that are being faced in this country, the United Kingdom, and of course across the globe. This book is called Constitutions in Times of Financial Crisis. And we know all about them and the problems that we've had in the past and what's probably going to come up post-Brexit. So this, I think, is an important book for all of us to look at. It's been edited by three people, Tom Ginsburg, Mark D. Rosen and Georg Vanberg. And the foreword has been written by Goncalo, Saraiva, Matias. And I'd like to thank everybody very much for the work they've done in this area, because it's certainly an important book for the 2020s. And I've given it a title, The Financial Crisis Revisited. Not a particularly strong title, but it just tries to give you an idea of where we have been to in the past because of what could quite clearly happen in the future. Let's look at the book. It's a hardback. There it is. You can see the book itself. There's the front. You can see the comparative comparative constitutional law and policy series mentioned at the top, and then the people, and then there's the spine, and then at the back there's not very much about the book itself. It's just a bit about the authors. They're all professors of various sorts. In fact, let's have a look. Ginsburg is Professor of International Law at Chicago. Rosen is Professor of Chicago Kent College, Illinois. And Vanberg is Professor of Political Science at Duke University. So you can see the very substantial pedigree. Let's go to the back of the book as the hardback. Right at the back we have, of course, got an index. There's the index by page numbering, which you can see there. Then it's not a big index at all, quite a small index. The book runs to 300 odd pages. There are footnotes. There's no real paragraph numbering. Some subheads with numbers, but the footnoting is at the bottom. There's a bit of it, not too much. Some parts of it there's more than others. Let's put it that way. That's the basic blurb about the book, and I'll talk about that in a minute. When we've then got some information, there's the front page there, we've then got some information about the book. That's the standard information from CUP. Then you can see the structure. They've got a list of the contributors. You've got various parts. It's actually in 5 parts. Part 1 is the role of the constitutions in dealing with crisis. Part 2, courts and crises. Part 3, supranational governance and crisis. 4, implementing austerity, very important area, looking at specific countries there, Portugal and Greece, and the effect of crises on constitutions. We're looking at specific countries throughout, and for each of the chapter heads it gives you the name of the contributor, so you've got some idea of who's been involved. Then there's a list of the contributors, and you can see the names. I can't go through all of them, but I'd like to thank everybody who's been involved in this. And then we get to the foreword. And it says, the foreword written by Goncalo, Saraiva, Matias. It is well known that the world financial crisis of 2007-8 posed several challenges to the constitutions of the affected countries. These challenges were faced not only by countries which were directly affected and had to implement austerity measures, including the UK, but also by countries whose economies were compelled to rescue others from the economic turmoil. This was particularly evident in Europe. Europe became, in this sense, a constitutional laboratory, given the effects of the financial crisis on economies, especially on the sovereign debt markets, on public finance, and ultimately on the ability of governments to sustain the welfare state. That is a very leading statement and a very important one, because that is the problem that the United Kingdom has had and continues to have, even though Mrs May, when she was Prime Minister, said the end of austerity had come. Well, we don't know where we are at the moment because we still haven't left the European Union. We have Johnson as the Prime Minister now. Cameron having instituted the era of austerity with Clegg under the coalition. So you can see that a lot of changes have happened. So that's the foreword. Then you've got the structure of the book there, the role itself, the constitutions. Then it starts off with the three editors talking in chapter 1, basically an introduction. It talks very specifically about most liberal democracies contain provisions that constrain government action in relation to economic policy. That is certainly the case. Then we go on from there. So what you've got is you've then got a lot of detail, and some of these articles, you can see, are very detailed indeed. I don't think this is a book for the uninitiated. It's a book which is very substantial in terms of its content. You can see some of the footnoting is quite substantial, and I think one of the difficulties about the book, which I think it's a first-class book because it's dealing with such an important subject, but one of the difficulties is the fact that the level at which it's pitched is very high. But that is partly to do with Cambridge University Press itself. They're not making any secret of the fact that that's exactly what they intend to do when they produce these works, and I'm grateful to them for doing so, because we do need to have a balance between those books which I review, which are for practitioners and unrepresented parties as practitioners, and then the books for the academic community, which are at a much higher level, but they're still dealing with basic principles that we have to look at, much of which of course is governed by politics. Now let me just take a little bit of what's in the book and comment on it, because the book basically says that many constitutions include provisions intended to limit the discretion of governments in economic policy, something which is said in a roundabout way in the introduction. In times of financial crisis, then, such provisions often come under pressure as a result of calls for exceptional responses to crisis situations. And that's basically what we've had. Certainly we had that in 2007 on, and we've been having a number of problems as a result of that, not in the United Kingdom but in other parts of the world. And remember, this book is looking at specific jurisdictions, and they're looking at one or two countries that have had major problems. Not going to give any spoilers away, because you can look at that yourselves, because I think it's an excellent book which assesses the ability of constitutional orders all over the world to cope with financial crises, because they do crop up on a regular basis. Some countries are in absolute chaos. There's no order whatsoever, and they just limp along. Others have got a much more ordered existence. And of course, what this book also examines is the demands for emergency powers that typically accompany countries where they have to face these financial crises. And what the authors have done with the contributors is to bring together a variety of perspectives from legal scholars, economists and political scientists, all coming together to give us a volume which traces the long-run implications of financial crises for constitutional order. Because at the end of the day, if it isn't sorted out, it leads to anarchy. And it leads to some of the appalling problems we have in some countries, most of which is not really reported in the world press, but we know it's there, and we know the terrible difficulties and the suffering that it causes, because what you have is massive inequalities between those who have and those who don't. Let me finally say that the book, in the short review, the book explores the theoretical and the practical problems raised by what they call the constitutionalization of economic policy during times of severe crisis. And so what we're getting here with this book are showcases which show an array of constitutional design options and the ways they can channel governmental responses to the emergencies that actually are created. Whether that is just purely theoretical is another matter, but I think it may be of interest more, as I say, to the researcher and academic than to the practitioner. But I think it does help in understanding what some of the problems are concerning constitutions and what they are actually having to face up to in times of financial crisis. The hardback version of this book was published on the 8th of June 2019. I'm recording it in the summer of 2019, and the book is also available as an ebook. Let's just have a look at it. It's not a big book at all, as I say, 300 odd pages. There's the front and the spine and then the back. And just opening it up in the middle, let's find something here to have a look at. This is supernatural governance and crisis, constitutionalism as limitation and license, crisis government in the European Union. Right in the middle of the book, page 187, you can see the structure. It's been written by Takula Isiksel. I can't pronounce the surname. Isiksel, I think the name is. I'm having a great deal of difficulty with the word. But however, whatever the name of the writer, what we've got here is an important piece of commentary looking at the European Union. I'm recording this, as I say, at a time when we don't know what is happening in the UK about leaving the European Union. But this again is looking at crises within the membership of the EU, and you can see the detail. There's a lot of detail here going all the way through. It starts off mentioning John Locke, famously depicting the sovereign as a fearsome lion. Then we move on to quite a lot of jurisprudence before we get in to some of the problems involved with what is in modern day parlance the difficulties of the EU in trying to deal and balance some of the problems. Then what you get at the end of each of these this one's quite a short commentary, is you get a short conclusion. It's not actually called a conclusion, but what he's doing, what the author in this particular chapter is doing, is giving you some idea of the future. And of course, in this case, he's looking specifically at the effect of the Treaty of Rome. That gives you an idea of the detail of the book itself. A big thank you to CUP and everybody who's been responsible for these various chapters that go up to build up the book. I found it a very interesting book to read, and something that was a bit sobering, bearing in mind at the moment we have a major problem in that we do not know what is happening with the British membership of the European Union, and only time will tell. In the meantime, CUP and all contributors, thank you very much. Bye-bye.